The day they asked me to sign in front of everyone, the room was unusually quiet. The wall clock was ticking, the AC hummed steadily, and the papers on the table were arranged as if the decision had already been made. The pen was slid toward me. No rush, no hesitation. They didn't know that I had already signed everything a year earlier. No one asked how I was feeling. In rooms like these, emotions aren't asked about, maturity is assumed. I was doing what had always been expected of me, staying calm, observing, and moving forward without noise. My life has been ordinary. Waking up on time, working, completing whatever is handed to me. People called me reliable. "You're strong," they'd say. "You'll manage." It sounded like praise, so I never thought there might be a condition hidden inside it. That condition became clear for the first time during a family meeting. No arguments, no accusations, just planning. Some responsibilities moved with convenience, identity, decisions, comfort. Others came with risk, accountability, paperwork, and everything that gets questioned first when something goes wrong. All eyes turned to me. "You'll handle this part," someone said casually. Then a half-finished line, like a coin dropped on the way, "You don't need much anyway." The math inside that one sentence was clear. If I said yes, risk was mine. If I said no, I wasn't practical. I nodded. Relief spread across the room. Files were pushed toward me. The conversation moved on. Someone said, "Good, now there's clarity." They thought the game was in their hands, because I was quiet. When I got home, I set the files aside. I didn't open them for a few days. From the outside, it looked like acceptance. But inside those pages, one thing was clear, something no one had read out loud. The accountability was mine, but the authority wasn't. And if something went wrong, that same signature could become my biggest weakness. At night, when the house went quiet, I opened those pages. I didn't read headings, I read clauses. I looked at the spaces between words. I tried to understand which sentence hid control and where consent was being assumed. I hadn't learned how to fight. I had learned how to understand. During the day, people talked about what was next, plans, next steps. Someone would casually say, "In the end, she'll sign it," and change the subject. They believed the burden had been lifted, so comfort was secure. They didn't know that very week, for the first time, I had stopped adjusting and started deciding. The room stayed quiet. Only now, the silence was slowly changing sides. Over the next few weeks, nothing broke. And that was what began to feel heavy. Work continued. Calls kept coming. My name kept getting added to files. No one reconfirmed whether this distribution was right or not. Once yes had been said, everything else was considered detail. People quickly formed a simple rule. Where clarity was needed, ask me. Where accountability was required, add my name. When credit came up, move the conversation forward. It wasn't malicious. It was convenient. "You're detail-oriented," someone said. "You don't complicate things," someone else added. The compliments were spoken like boundaries, but in reality, they were expectations. My role in meetings was quietly shifting. Earlier, I received the agenda. Now, my notes were circulated. Earlier, I was invited. Now, my presence was assumed. No one announced it, but everyone had accepted that execution was my responsibility. Then a small incident happened. An email arrived, many people CC'd. The subject was simple: final approval. The mail had one line: "Since she's handling this, let's move forward." She's handling this. The approval belonged to someone else. The risk was mine. I stared at the screen for a long time. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't shorthand. It was the same assumption, now in writing. This was where silence stopped being neutral. It was being used like consent. That night, I didn't change my behavior. I didn't show resistance. I simply started creating a record. Notes after every call. Timestamps after every decision. Exact wording beneath every "as discussed." This wasn't fear. It was insurance. In the US, systems don't run on voices, they run on documentation. And documentation is built by the one who begins to understand the game. During the day, people talked about the future, expansion, the next phase. Someone would casually say, "In the end, she'll sign." I mentally added, "End for whom, and who the signature binds." Slowly, one more thing began to change. My sleep. Even after closing the files at night, I kept replaying clauses. Not thinking about what was written, but about where it could be used against me. The price of being called strong was finally becoming visible. In one meeting, someone said with a half smile, "Honestly, we're lucky someone as practical as you is handling this." There was appreciation in that sentence. Not choice. I started asking questions now, but not confrontational ones. Written questions. Direct questions. If X happens, who has approval? In this scenario, where does liability go? The answers never came immediately. Sometimes it was, "We'll circle back." And when the answers came, they were written in lines that could be twisted when needed. They thought the workload was being distributed. They didn't see that documentation was creating a map, who decides and who only carries. On the outside, I was still adjusting. Inside, something else was happening. That week, one night, I admitted this to myself for the first time. This wasn't just work. This was the place where one wrong yes could become my identity, and one correct no, my protection. I didn't tell anyone anything. I simply decided that next time, the question wouldn't be whether I would sign or not. The question would be, in what capacity? And in that moment, silence stopped being a habit. It had become a strategy. Over the next few days, another difference became clear. People weren't trusting me. They were depending on me. The difference doesn't show up in words, it shows up in timing. Trust creates space. Dependency creates urgency. Now, whenever a decision stalled, the file was pushed toward me. And when a deadline got close, the same familiar line returned, "We assumed you'd handle that." Assumed. Past tense. Settled. The rhythm of meetings had changed. Earlier, options were laid out. Now, conclusions were announced. The middle part, analysis, risk, follow-through, fell to me. No one had openly designed it this way. It had just happened. Comfortably. One day, deliberately, I left a gap. A minor approval. Non-urgent, but necessary. I didn't follow up. 2 hours later, a message came, "Any update?" I didn't reply. And in the third hour, for the first time, a meeting was delayed. No big drama. The agenda was simply reshuffled. One decision moved to next week. There was a faint discomfort in the room, not enough to be named, but enough to be noticed. Someone said, "Let's not get stuck on process." Process, when flow breaks, that's what it's called. That's where the first crack showed. The system didn't stop, but it stumbled. That same day, a forwarded email arrived. The subject read, "Proceeding as discussed." There was no discussion in the thread. The approval came from somewhere else. The risk still carried my name. This was no longer accidental. That night, I turned my notes into a timeline, dates, names, exact phrases. This wasn't a trap. It was memory, the system's, not mine. And once memory exists, one thing changes. It becomes harder to ignore. The emotional cost was rising too. Sleep had already grown light. Now isolation joined in. During the day, I was among everyone, and still alone. Decisions that carried my name were being made without me. The price of being called strong is that no one asks whether you're okay. One night, awake late, I asked myself a question. What would happen if I suddenly stepped away? This wasn't curiosity. It was a safety check. The answer came the next morning. A call. The tone unusually tight. "We were supposed to finalize today," the voice said. Then a pause. "Without you, it's stuck." For the first time, dependency was named, accidentally, but clearly. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I simply asked, in this part, who has final authority? On the other end of the line, the pause was longer this time. Long enough that it couldn't be ignored. "Let me check," came the reply. Check, When authority isn't clear, that's what people say. As I hung up, one thing became clear. This system ran on my adjustment. And now, I wasn't adjusting, I was asking. The difference seems small, but that's where systems begin to change. After that day, things didn't go back to smooth. They continued, but not the same way. Assumptions no longer passed easily. Every pause became a reminder. Every delay, a signal. And here, without any announcement, I had reached a place where going back wasn't easy. Because once a system pauses without you, you can't be invisible again. After that, I didn't start anything new. I just did the same things, more carefully. During the day, work continued as usual. Calls, meetings, small follow-ups. From the outside, nothing looked different. To anyone watching, it would seem like I was still doing what I always had, adjusting, managing, moving forward. The real change happened at night. I opened files, but the way I read them had changed. Earlier, I studied clauses. Now, I studied sequence. Which approval becomes meaningful after which? Which signature is symbolic, and which is binding? Which words carry authority, and which only carry responsibility? This wasn't studying. It was mapping. I didn't ask anyone for help. I didn't look for a mentor. I didn't take shortcuts. I knew, if this process became visible, it would be misunderstood. Preparation, when seen, is called ambition. And ambition invites questions. So I kept it quiet. During the day, one by one, I kept asking the same questions, but the timing changed. Earlier, I asked after everything was decided. Now, I asked just before, when a small answer could bend the entire path. What's the scope of this approval? If the timeline shifts, who owns it? Which clause does this exception fall under? Sometimes the answers were clear, sometimes vague, and sometimes it was, we'll figure it out. I noted, who has to figure it out, and at what cost? One day, a document came back with minor edits. Harmless on the surface. But near the bottom, one line had changed. Just one verb. May had become will. I didn't reply immediately. I pulled out the original version, tracked the change. And that same day, for the first time, I asked for a correction, in writing. The response came late. The tone was polite. But the pace was slower. This wasn't resistance. It was friction. I could see it now. The system relied on my silence to run smoothly. And once silence becomes structure, even a question turns into a disturbance. The emotional cost rose again. Now, after conversations, there was a faint exhaustion. Not because I was doing more work, but because I had started weighing every word. Being strong no longer just meant handling things. It meant not saying yes in the wrong place. One evening, on an informal call, someone laughed and said, "You've become very detail-oriented lately." The line was a joke, but behind it was discomfort. I smiled and changed the subject. And I noted it. Things weren't under my control yet, and that wasn't my goal. My goal was to make control visible, so that the next time someone said, "We assumed," the weight of that assumption would be felt. I split my notes into two parts. One, what was officially said. The other, what was practically done. The gap between the two was the system's real story. By the end of that week, a small moment arrived. One approval now required two names. Earlier, one had been enough. Now, it wasn't. No one asked why. It was simply said, let's be safe. Safe, when certainty starts to fade, that's the word that appears. That night, as I went to sleep, I realized this was no longer just my preparation. This was a point where going back isn't easy. Because once you learn to ask questions, staying silent doesn't feel natural again. I was still adjusting, at least on the surface. Inside, I was doing something else. I was making sure that the next time the system rested on me, it also understood on what terms. And that's where the game began to change. Without noise, a few weeks later, the atmosphere changed. Not the work, the tone. There was now a comfort in conversations. A certainty. As if everyone had accepted that the hardest part was over. The detail-heavy work was being handled. And what was visible was moving forward confidently. In one meeting, someone said, "Things are stable now." Someone opened the timeline. Someone announced the next phase. I said nothing. Comfort often kills questions like slow poison. When a system appears to be running smoothly, people assume the steering wheel is still where it used to be. Who's actually holding the direction starts to feel like an unnecessary question. Now things didn't come as requests. They came as assumptions. This must already be covered. She must have looked at it. She'll sign at the end anyway. These sentences weren't part of meetings. They moved through corridors, light, confident, and unchallenged. Then a draft arrived. Not urgent, but irreversible. The announcement was scheduled for the next day. I read the document. One clause was missing, the same clause that balanced risk. It hadn't been removed. It had simply been left out. I didn't ask. I highlighted it. In the comment, I wrote just one line, "This changes ownership." The response came almost immediately. "It's fine. We've always done it this way." Always, when comfort turns history into a weapon. The next morning, the first visible consequence arrived. A call. The tone wasn't formal, it was cold. "Why are you slowing this down?" It wasn't a question. It was positioning. For the first time, blame was floating in the air, unnamed. For the first time, I was being seen as a problem, not protection. The tone in meetings began to shift. Where there had been eye contact, there were now quick glances. Decisions that carried my name were finalized without me, and then sent to me as FYI. This was new. The cost of being called strong was no longer just exhaustion. Now there was distance too. One evening, a message arrived, not in a group, but directly. "Just checking, are you still aligned with the direction?" Aligned. When obedience is called alignment. I didn't reply immediately. In that delay, something irreversible happened. I realized that stepping back was no longer a neutral option. If I adjusted now, it wouldn't be silence, it would be consent. And once consent is given, asking for boundaries back is almost impossible. I couldn't sleep that night. This time not from overthinking, from something else. Fear. The fear that if I was right, people would see me as difficult. And if I was wrong, the responsibility would be entirely mine. The next morning, a revised draft arrived. The clause was back. The language was tight. But a new line had been added. Pending leadership sign-off. Who leadership wasn't written. But the message was clear. Decisions would now move upward. This wasn't protection. This was escalation. That's when I understood. Comfort had broken. The system was now on the defensive. And when a system goes defensive, it either respects boundaries, or it crushes them. In that moment, I decided stepping back was no longer safe. Because I was no longer just a variable. I had become a checkpoint. And no system moves past a checkpoint without accounting for it. After that, things sped up. So fast that no one seemed to notice. The speed wasn't coming from trust, but from anxiety. Decisions started moving upward. Not small ones, visible ones. Announcements were being made faster. More people were being CC'd on emails. The language was confident, almost rehearsed. As if the system was trying to prove that control was still exactly where it had always been. Let's move forward. Leadership is aligned. We don't want delays. These weren't assurances. They were reminders of who held the steering wheel. My role hadn't officially changed. The title was the same. The access was the same. But a subtle shift had happened. I was no longer asked the way I used to be. I was informed, and then expected to follow up. In one morning update, someone casually said, "We've streamlined approvals." Streamlined, when friction is bypassed. I opened the document. The process had indeed changed. Some steps were removed. Some approvals were combined. On paper, it was efficiency. On the ground, risk concentration. I said nothing. I wrote just one question, in writing. If a next scenario arises, who has override? The reply came quickly. Let's not complicate edge cases. Edge cases, when responsibility is kept below and authority above. That same day, a deadline was advanced. No discussion, no rationale. Just information. The message was clear, the system was pushing now. And pushing happens when confidence starts protecting itself. The tone in meetings shifted again. Where disagreement once had space, it was now crushed by speed. "We don't have time for this" became a recurring line. Time, when clarity starts to feel threatening. One afternoon, a slip happened. A document circulated, the final version. It contained an assumption that wasn't true. Not minor, structural. If that version moved forward, the responsibility would legally be mine. I replied, not reply all. Direct. Short. That assumption isn't accurate. Please correct before release. No response for 5 minutes. That had never happened before. Then it came, but in a different tone. Why wasn't this flagged earlier? Earlier, when the assumption was quietly passing through. This was the first time blame openly tilted toward me. No accusation, just framing. If there's an issue, why was it spotted late? That's where the overconfidence showed. The system had assumed the safety net would always be there. That I would fill the gap. That everything would stabilize at the last moment. This time, I didn't fill the gap. I asked for the correction, in writing. The meeting was delayed. The announcement was put on hold. And for the first time, someone said, "This is becoming a bottleneck." Bottleneck, when a checkpoint becomes uncomfortable. With that word, something else changed too. Conversations now carried irritation along with urgency. Messages grew shorter. Courtesy thinner. Pressure increased in the name of efficiency. The emotional cost here was different. It wasn't exhaustion or fear. It was alienation. Same people, same rooms, but I was no longer part of the flow. I was the obstacle. A late call came in. The tone was calm, almost friendly. "We need you aligned," they said. Then a pause. This can't turn into a pattern. Pattern, when resistance begins to repeat. I took a few seconds. Then said, "Alignment comes from clarity." There was silence on the other end. Not long, but uncomfortable. After that call, one thing became clear. The overconfidence had turned defensive. The system was moving fast, but the footing was loose. Every shortcut was pushing risk onto my name, and every correction was creating irritation. They believed control was with them. I could see, control was being displayed. And when control is displayed, it isn't actually being held. It's slipping. That night, I closed my notes. Not for the first time, but deliberately. Because now, preparation didn't just... That pressure didn't arrive suddenly. It was prepared. A morning invite came in, short notice. The subject was neutral. The agenda vague. The attendee list long. It was the same pattern I'd seen before. When questions become uncomfortable in private, they get diluted in public. The room was full. Familiar faces. Casual tone. Someone cracked a joke. Someone mentioned coffee. Everything tried to look normal, as if this were just a routine alignment. Then the slide changed. The timeline was tighter. Milestones had been pulled forward. Assumptions were in bold. And every assumption ended the same way. Final sign-off pending. Pending from whom, it wasn't written. But everyone looked at me. "Just to keep things moving," someone said. "We'll need your sign-off by end of day." By end of day, when thinking time is cut off. This wasn't a request. It was an expectation, placed in front of an audience. I took a few seconds. Long enough for the silence to be noticed. Before that, I said, "I need one clarification." There was movement in the room. Very slight. Like someone adjusting a chair. Clarification, when flow is interrupted. If we move forward with this assumption, I pointed to the slide. Then who holds the liability? No one spoke immediately. Then came the same line that always comes. "We're team. We'll figure it out." Team, When a clear answer isn't given, someone else added, "Let's not get stuck. We've discussed this already." Discussed, when the discussion never actually happened. The pressure was visible now. Eyes. Pauses. That subtle impatience that spreads through a room when someone steps outside the agreed narrative. This is the moment most people step back, because public discomfort turns into personal risk. I asked again, quietly, "Can this be clarified in writing?" A small laugh. Do we really need to formalize everything? Formalize, when accountability feels threatening. That's where the gaslighting started. Not loud. Not rude. Efficient. "You're usually flexible. This is unlike you. We trust your judgment." Every sentence was soft, and every sentence meant the same thing: sign, and we'll move on. Something shifted inside me. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. If I signed here, this wouldn't just be an approval. It would be a message that public pressure can override private boundaries. I said, "Not today." Just that. The silence in the room deepened. This wasn't the silence of thought. It was the silence that comes when control slips. "Not today," someone repeated, trying to keep the tone neutral. "The timeline." "A timeline is meaningful," I said, "only when responsibility is clear." Now the eyes weren't curious, they were calculating. The meeting wrapped up quickly. No confrontation. No resolution. Just one line. "We'll regroup offline." Offline, when public conversation fails. After that, the fallout began quietly. Messages grew shorter. Calls were rescheduled. An invite, one I was always on, didn't come this time. This was new. The emotional cost here was real. It wasn't fear. It was exclusion. Being called strong no longer meant everyone trusted me. It meant that when I said no, the system separated me. That evening, on my way home, I realized for the first time, this was no longer just professional. It had reached identity. The people who once saw me as reliable could now see me as difficult. And still, I didn't regret it. Because in that room, in front of everyone, I had made one thing clear. My yes wouldn't come from convenience. And my no wouldn't make noise. After that day, pressure stopped being private. It started becoming policy. And when pressure becomes policy, the next step is always consequences. I was ready for that. Things didn't become quiet after that. They became formal. Pressure no longer came through messages or looks. It had dissolved into process. New approvals. New checkpoints. New best practices. From the outside, everything looked orderly, as if the system were maturing. Inside, it was resistance, without sound, without confrontation. The first retaliation was subtle, but clear. A recurring meeting I was always part of disappeared from my calendar. No announcement. No explanation. The invite simply stopped coming. That same day, a summary email arrived, key decisions captured below. Captured, without me. The second shift showed up in Access. A shared folder I used to edit was now view only. Labeled temporary. Just while we streamline. Streamline, when visibility is cut. Meetings became more structured. Speaking time fixed. Questions slotted at the end, when fatigue had already done its work. Red lines started being called late-stage noise. This wasn't control. This was containment. That same week, a meeting with an external stakeholder happened. The question was simple. The same assumption. The same risk, this time from outside. Reflexively, the room's eyes turned toward me. Muscle memory. I said nothing. 2 seconds. 3. Someone else answered. Half accurate. The stakeholder followed up. The answer wobbled. The tone shifted. The meeting grew awkward. After the call, an email arrived, from the external side, asking for clarification. I wasn't asked to reply to that email. Instead, a hastily drafted response circulated. Safe sounding, but wrong. The next day, the stakeholder sent a written concern. Not small, formal. That was the hit the system felt. That afternoon, urgency changed. Calls tightened. Voices lowered, but sped up. "We need you more involved," one message said. Then the next line. "But within the new structure." Structure, when help is needed, but on conditions. I replied, short, calm. "I need clarity first." After that came the third retaliation, the clearest one. A deliverable I was leading was reassigned to someone else. The reason was neutral, bandwidth. The announcement casual. The impact loud. This wasn't ambiguity anymore. This was sidelining. The emotional cost shifted here. It wasn't isolation. It was the realization of replaceability. Same work. Same context. But my name had become optional. I opened my notes. This time, not clauses, people mapping. Who pushes? Who protects? Who's comfortable with silence? And who's quietly exploring alternatives? Replacement wasn't just in the air anymore. It was in the pipeline. On an informal call, without naming anyone, someone said, "We should build redundancy." Redundancy, when a person is treated as a risk. That's when survival mode activated. I didn't make announcements. I didn't choose a fight. I just hardened one boundary, in writing. Wherever my name was added, I asked for the exact line of responsibility. Where clarity was missing, I paused. Delays began appearing in rooms. Decisions went into second pass. "Let's confirm" became common. The system was moving again, but now with friction. That day didn't arrive like an alarm. It arrived like a calendar block, normal, packed, and deceptively routine. Calls were lined up from the morning. One-on-ones. Quick syncs. One final review. The language was crisp, almost rehearsed. It was the tone a system uses when it's convincing itself that everything is under control. The first slip was small. An approval chain broke. One name was missing. An email came back, "Please advise." Advise from whom? It wasn't clear. 2 minutes later, another email. Then a third. The same question, in different threads. I didn't respond. I observed. By noon, it was clear there was a hole in the map. Decisions were moving forward, but the line of responsibility kept stalling at the same point. The same line that had been assumed for months was now being asked about. A meeting was called, short notice. The same room. The same faces. But this time, the eyes were different. "Can you confirm who owns this?" someone asked. For the first time, the question was asked publicly. No one spoke immediately. Then came the familiar sentence, "We'll circle back." Circle back, when there's no way forward. In that same meeting, a neutral third person spoke up. Not external, but uninvolved. The tone was factual, without edge. "Moving forward without clarifying ownership is risky," they said. Just that. Something shifted in the room. This wasn't validation, it was a mirror. No one was taking my side. No one was taking theirs. Reality had simply been placed on the table. Plain, unarguable. After that, the dominoes started falling. One announcement was put on hold. One deadline slipped. One stakeholder asked for written assurance, specific, named. Assumptions stopped working. Comfort evaporated. A corridor conversation drifted to me, unintentionally. Who actually signs off on this? Another voice, I thought she did. The first, she said not without clarity. She said, this was new. Earlier, it used to be, she'll handle it. Now it was, she won't. Afternoon, a call came in, from leadership. The tone was calm, almost conciliatory. We need to reset, they said. Reset, when previous certainty breaks. They laid out options. Processes. Temporary fixes. No clear answer. Every path seemed to bypass me, and then loop right back to my name. I listened. I didn't interrupt. Then I asked one question, in a written follow-up. Where is final authority documented? The response came late. And when it did, it was incomplete. That's when the realization fully landed. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was misread power. People had mistaken control for speed. And speed works, until someone asks who's responsible. By evening, a new language had entered the rooms. Let's be careful. Let's document. Let's pause. Pause, when a system starts breathing. No one came to apologize. No confessions. Just distance. This wasn't revenge. It was consequence. That day, there was one thing I didn't do. I didn't capitalize. No speech. No, I told you so. I simply kept the boundaries exactly where they already were, written, clear, unmoving. On the way home, I didn't feel light. I felt clear. An identity had quietly shifted. I was no longer the safety net. I was the checkpoint, one that couldn't be bypassed. And checkpoints are either accepted, or someone tries to remove them. I could already sense the next move. Because when control slips, the final attempt is always the same. End it cleanly. And that attempt, I knew, wasn't far away. The end didn't arrive like a decision. It arrived like an absence. The next morning, I opened my calendar, and one meeting wasn't there. The same meeting that anchored every week. No cancellation. No explanation. Just an empty slot, as if it had never existed. Then an email arrived. Short. Neutral. Polite. Given the reset, we'll be moving forward with a revised structure. Revised, when something is removed without being named. My name was in the email. But not my role. No blame. No praise. Just language that says, your need has changed. I didn't reply. That day, I did something I had never done before. I listed my access. Documents. Approvals. Sign-offs. What was formerly in my name stayed. What ran on assumption started collapsing on its own. By afternoon, the first call came in. The tone was calm. Almost careful. Some things are getting stuck, they said. We need quick clarity. I asked, on what? Pause. Ownership. Ownership, the same word that had been avoided for months. I said, please send it in writing. That was it. A little later, the same neutral third person, the one who had held up the mirror, came to me. No advice. No sympathy. Just one line. This is where systems recognize themselves. I nodded. By evening, the direction was clear. Some responsibilities were formalized, without me. Some approvals were rerouted, without me. And some things stayed stuck, because they couldn't move without me. This wasn't a win. It was rebalancing. I didn't retaliate. I didn't expose anyone. I didn't slam any doors. I simply let go of the grip everyone had mistaken for my strength. After that, distance came in. Fewer meetings. Rare messages. Polite, but thin tone. Same people, same corridors, but now assumptions weren't flowing without me. And that was uncomfortable for them. For me, it was clear. I learned that strength isn't what lets you carry everything. Strength is what stops you from carrying, when the price is wrong. A few weeks later, in an informal conversation, someone said, things changed when you stopped signing. Stopped signing, as if it had been a habit. I said nothing. Because it wasn't a habit. It was consent, and I had taken it back. The system was running again now. Slower. Documented. With names attached. The balance wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And honesty brings friction, not collapse. I didn't feel changed. I felt recognized. Earlier, I was called strong. Now, I was asked, in what capacity? The difference seems small. But that's where power lives. I didn't leave that place. I stayed, just standing somewhere else. Where burden doesn't land. Where comfort isn't borrowed. Where silence isn't consent. And that's the moment they understood. Putting everything in my name was never control. It was simply my permission. That permission was gone. And without raising my voice. Without defeating anyone. The balance had shifted.